Welcome and hello. This is a video tutorial on HEC ResSim, and in this lesson, I'm going to be talking about release function rules. Release function rules are one type of rule in ResSim that are applied to reservoirs. What we have on the screen here is a connected network that I've already created. I'm in the reservoir network module, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. So here's the network. I'm going to go ahead and click the pointer tool or the reservoir tool, and then right click on the reservoir, edit reservoir properties. As you notice, I've already added a few elements to the dam. We have the dam, there's a controlled outlet, outlet group, power plant, and uncontrolled outlet. I've only added data to the controlled outlet because I'm only going to use this particular element for today's rule. Over in the operations tab, I've also created an operation set and a few zones. There's the flood control zone, zone A, zone B, and inactive. In previous videos, I was using curve A and curve B for zone, but I just decided to change it to zone A and zone B to be a little bit more explicit. Go ahead and click rule and then new. Once the desired zone is selected, I actually want to select zone A. So I could actually go right click on zone A and then add new rule. It's the same thing. And then here is my rule. So let's go ahead and add some data here. For the name, I'm going to say controlled outlet release function. That is not a good name for a rule, but I'm going to apply it to the controlled outlet, and it's going to be a release function rule. So for the time being, this is a good enough name. I'll go back and rename it later. As mentioned, this is for the controlled outlet. I can select the reservoir, the dam, the power plant, or the controlled outlet. So that's cool. And this is a release function rule. The other options for controlled outlets are flow rate of change limit, script, and prescribed release. The rule type options do depend on the element you select in the drop down up above. So if I select reservoir, we have different options here, but release function is still an option. Same with power plant. If I select power plant, we have different options for rule type, but release function is still an option. So let me change that back to controlled outlet, and then release function is still there. That's good. The release function rules is one of the most flexible rules available in ResSim, and it's likely most of your rules will be release function rules. And this rule takes the form of the prescribed release from the reservoir from this rule will be a function of something. It could be almost anything. For instance, the date, the water surface elevation in the reservoir pool, the water surface elevation in a different reservoir pool, the tailwater elevation, the flow rate at a junction, a combination of any of the things I just mentioned. The list goes on and on. So let me go ahead and click OK. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. And here we have the rule in its name over here. The name is also right here. And here's the description, which I could add if I wanted. Next, what I want to do is actually use an example. I think using examples sometimes helps us get our minds around how things work and also helps me describe some of the details with an actual example. So this example comes from the user's manual, but I'm changing the numbers slightly. It goes like this. The maximum release from the reservoir during growing season is 2000 CFS, and during non-growing season, the maximum release from the reservoir is 3000 CFS. One of the things we have to define for release function rules is the limit type. Our options are maximum, minimum, and specified. Maximum basically sets a maximum on the release. Minimum sets a minimum, and specified will specify a single point value. You could think of it as a minimum and a maximum that's constrained to just one single value. If you were listening to the example I said, this is a maximum. So I'm going to go ahead and select maximum for 2000 and 3000 CFS. And then above that, we have the function of. So go ahead and click the define button over to the right. And this is where we identify this rule to be based on the independent variable. which could be the date and time, a model variable, external variable, or state variable. This is going to be based on date, and I will talk about these other variables in a later video, but let's just go ahead and select date and then select OK. Now what we see is a table of values, date in one column, and then the release. And remember, this release refers to the rule, which is the maximum release. I have some data ready to paste in over in Excel, so I'll go ahead and do that here. 3,000 and then 2,000 and then back to 3,000 based on whether it's growing season or not. Now, I just assumed the growing season was March through August, and here is my data. The only problem with this data is obvious from the plot is that the linear interpolation between um, the February 1st and March 1st, as well as between August 1 and September 1, it really should be more of a step function. So before I even read about the interpolation, I just added a few dates to force that step function, even though linear interpolation is selected, which is the default. So this looks pretty goofy, but I added a February 28 and 29 and an August 31. So the very next day was the change, and that's September 1 and March 1. That's not necessary. So I'm going to paste the old data back in place. And then I have to remove the last few rows here. One moment. All right. Because over here, there's a drop down for interpolation, and our options are linear, which we had, step, and cubic. What I wanted was step. So when I click step, automatically, that's what I want. With linear, you're doing a linear interpolation between the two bounding dates. With step, it's basically going to maintain the same value for the last prescribed date until the new date changes and you hit a new line item, and then that's the new value until you hit a new item or the next new date in the table. The last option here is cubic, and this is not what I want for this particular rule. You can see it sort of violates the 3,000 max and 2,000 max, or like it's less than 2,000 when that's not true. So I want to go with step. There are situations where the cubic interpolation is the best, but this is just not one of them. So, all right, that was a very quick introduction to the release function rules. There's more to talk about with regard to rules, so uh, hang on, watch the next video for more information. But this is just an introduction to talk about how the function of is selected, the limit type, the interpolation, and then entering some data. So I'm going to go ahead and click apply. That saves the data without closing the dialog box. And be sure to watch some of the previous videos with regard to copying that rule to other zones and then modifying the rules and rules management as well.